This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. Hello and welcome to this week's episode, where my guests are Northern California-based musical duo Misner and Smith. Sam, who is Misner, and Megan, who is Smith, comprise one of the most acclaimed acts in the Americana world. Blending elements of that genre with bluegrass, traditional folk ballads and more pop-leaning ideas, they've been described as making music that is gloriously nonconforming. Aside from their musical chops, Sam and Megan are expert gardeners who focus on pollinators, sustainability and community gardening. Listen on to find out how their connection to nature feeds into their music.
My sort of first memories are in the garden with my mom, sort of like playing in the dirt, looking for insects under the leaf mold, and planting plants, planting vegetables, harvesting vegetables from the garden, because we had a garden growing up. And we used to go visit my Nana in England quite frequently, and she was also an avid gardener, which isn't completely unusual over in the UK, but it's not as popular over here. And so, that was a real touchstone for me growing up, and, a real focus in terms of how I bonded with both my mom and my Nana over the gardening. Even now, as an adult in my middle age, I still feel like I'm really connected with both of them when I'm gardening. So it's a really personal thing for me. And then as I've grown older, I've become more interested in getting involved in programs that educate the public about how they can start their own gardens and how they can be good stewards of the land they live on. So I got involved in what's called the Master Gardeners over here, which sounds very highfalutin, but it's just basically a program that is connected with our local university here, our university system. It's an extension of that. And we basically take information that we get from the horticultural departments here and the sort of the best science-based information that we can get. And we teach that through the Master Gardener program to the public. And we have a teaching garden downtown, which I ended up being the head of one of the parts of it. It's the rose and flower part that I'm the head of with my cohort. We're co-leaders. And so it's just been really wonderful to kind of step into that role as an adult, having grown up here in this town, Davis, which is a small college town, going away for a long time, living in bigger cities and different places, and then coming back. It's been really great to reconnect with everybody through gardening and through teaching people how to get the most out of their own gardens. So I guess that's kind of my connection to it.
Personally, I grew up out in the country. So where my parents still live is surrounded by ranch land and farming, about a little more than an hour north of San Francisco. So we had a garden growing up as well, surrounded by agriculture and that kind of culture too. And I've always had a strong connection to the outdoors in general. And when we moved back here to Davis from San Francisco 15 years ago or something, and Megan was kind of reconnecting with suddenly having space to garden, I jumped in as well and love working outdoors. I still do that for some of my work as well. But one of the biggest projects that's kind of over the past 15 years, headed by Megan, really, in her desire to kind of foster wildlife habitat and pollinators, especially. We've transformed what was a typical suburban front lawn with nothing but a lawn into several beds of a mix of mainly focused on pollinators, but a lot of native plants, and transformed this small lawn area into a garden with paths and places to sit. And it's transformed. We've noticed the difference in more birds, more bugs. It's a habitat now, and that's been a real cool connection to make with the spot that we live on.
I got some literature about you, and one of the things that kind of jumped out to me was that it said that you believe that gardening is a creative outlet. And that really interested me because of, from a purely horticultural point of view, it interests me, but also because of the other creative outlet that you have. So how do you find that gardening kind of taps into your creativity?
Well, I think it's a couple different things. One, I think it's just that basic mental health thing that we were sort of discussing before we started talking, which was it's just good for your whole being to be outside and connected with all the ecosystems and all of the natural world around you. So there's that. It's really important for our mental health. But also, I think in terms of the creativity, there's a sort of like a difference and a similarity between creating music and creating, a garden. Time is a really specific part of it. Time can be both, I can disappear into the garden for hours. It's like time is sort of all relative. So, you can be inside the music for a long time and hours can go by and you just don't notice because you're so focused on the microcosms of the music. And with gardening, it's the same way. You go out there and every day you see something new. It really keeps you in the moment and you can only think about what you're looking at because there's so much to kind of take in. So it really grounds you in a way. And I know that's sort of a pun as well, but I think it's true. It really forces you to just stay in the moment and be present. And when you're in that kind of headspace, I think creativity becomes more accessible. I think with our modern lives, it can be really difficult to get into that headspace because we're so distracted by all kinds of other stimulus, that is always coming at us. And so having the garden, having this outlet of music, it continues to place you in that spot in your mind where you are open to creativity and you are ready to kind of receive ideas and your imagination is kind of switched on. So I think that's been extremely important for our development over the last 10 years or so, to have the garden, to have the space, to have the place that we live also be sort of like a well of peace and creativity.
That's so true. And also there's an element of both gardening and songwriting and arranging of music where, at least from my perspective, it's the most important thing is being open to observing what is around you. What does the garden need? Not necessarily does it need more water or fertilizer, but creatively creating a landscape. And also, like in a song, often the way we work, it isn't sitting down and I have a full mapped out version of what exactly this song is going to be. In a similar way to the garden, it's impressions that then build off of that. Here's a cool line I came up with or a nice melody. How does that develop? Here's a plant that works well in this environment. What would be good to set off the colors there in the winter or in the summer, and kind of playing with observing from the outside and then kind of executing in a way. We often say in music that it's more about listening than what you're playing. Because if you're really listening, you can hear where to place things, what's needed without cluttering the audio space. And the same thing in a garden. You could put a million plants in and then you've just got a jungle, which is also beautiful. But finding ways to observe the surroundings or the song you're working on and kind of letting the garden tell you what it needs, or the song is a similar approach we take on both.
I love that you said that because there's this idea of control we have as human beings where we want to control all the outcomes because it makes us feel comforted to have control over our surroundings. I think that's pretty universal. It can be anyway. And I think with the garden, it teaches you you don't have control. You really don't. And having control isn't really the point. And I think in terms of music, our music especially, that is true. We kind of allow the songs to develop through us, but we don't have control over where they go.
We try to let the songs reveal themselves.
Yeah, we try to let them reveal themselves in a similar way that the garden has really revealed itself to us. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Obviously you've got your new album out, and I will put links to it in the show notes and everything. And I was thinking, you spoke about headspace and you spoke about observation and just allowing, I suppose, observing and having the room to be creative, and the garden teaching you that as a skill almost. But does it directly inform songs in terms of lyrics and themes as well?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Both on this album and in some of our previous songs on other albums, there's references to being there. On one of the songs, there's a line that's, "I'm a quiet little seed waiting in a little piece of ground. Far as I can tell, light is just another kind of sound." So something as direct as that, certainly. And then also just the idea that in other songs on this album, the album's called All Is Song. And we think of the garden as a song in a way too, not necessarily something that's just audible, but it's like it has a beginning, a middle, it has a cycle. There's something so cyclical about gardening. And in the same way, some of the songs reflect those themes of light and dark, and you need the light and you need the dark. You can't have one without the other. So there's also some themes on other songs on this album that kind of take up that as well. Yeah.
And something that I've realized after the project, we sort of have finished the project and we're talking to people about the project, something that's come up for me has been the link between the power and the strength of life, of a living thing pushing its way through the earth, of water grinding down a stone, and the strength and the power of music in our lives as human beings. And I think that's been something that I keep coming back to. One of the songs on the new album is called Silence of the Sun, and the first portion of the lyrics were inspired by a Dylan Thomas poem. And it's all about the force that drives the plant to come alive out of the ground. And
that it's the same force that is driving us to stay alive, to celebrate living, to continue.
And I think in a lot of our culture growing up, I was lucky enough to grow up in a time where music was actually still included in education and public education in schools. And so that's a lot of how I got started. But very often we're told that music, gardening, the arts and culture, humanities in general are very much an extracurricular thing. You should have your serious life. And then, yes, you can balance it with something that's less serious. But I think what I keep coming back to is these things, especially the way I've chosen to live my life, gardening, music, arts, they're all such a bigger part of who we want to be as human beings than we really give them credit for in our culture. And I think I keep realizing that more and more as we do more music and we spend more time in the garden. These things are vital to our survival as humans. It's something we all need.
And it's interesting to think about those kind of universal themes and how they're expressed in the garden and how you tap into them through the garden and through music. Taking it very literally, do you ever use elements of your soundscape of your garden in your songs as well?
Actually, that's funny you asked that. We did include a couple of natural, I guess, for lack of a better word, sounds on the album. Some ideas we had early on were that we wanted to kind of link the songs internally with these, we call them interludes. And a couple of them, there's a fox sparrow singing on one of the interludes. It's a recording that my father made, actually, because he's a birder. He likes to go, he's a twitcher, I guess is what you call it. But he likes to go watch birds, and he had recorded this really cool bird song of the fox sparrow. So we actually included that. And then
some
at the
crickets.
very end, there's a really cool recording of a cricket singing outside our window. We were actually at the studio that night, and because we spent the night there every now and then, and the cricket is singing, and then way, way, way in the background, you hear a siren of like an emergency vehicle going by. And I loved the two of those together. And I thought that really was sort of emblematic of what we were trying to say with, that theme of all is song that ended up being the title of the album. So yeah, there's definitely some of that on the album too.
Yeah, and thinking about where you were recording, do you choose surroundings that are appropriate for the recording process? Do you pick them beforehand, and do they influence how the things come out?
Well, we didn't choose the studio. This studio, we actually recorded our last 2 albums before this one at the studio. So we knew sonically, and our co-producer whose studio it is, Bruce Kappen, there's a very beautiful area outside, but that's not the reason
he happens to be a gardener.
He also
as well.
does happen to be a gardener. So we always inspect the gardens first before we record there and make sure. No, I'm kidding. So not so much the natural environment, but the environment of recording. It's so important to feel comfortable in the space that you're trying to kind of shed, the outside world and try to shed your own insecurities or worries. So the more comfortable in that space, it's really important in that. So being able to walk outside and decompress for a few minutes before you start recording again and have it be this beautiful garden that Bruce and Michelle have, it's certainly influenced, if we had been in an environment where you walk outside and it's just as stressful as some of the moments when you're recording, then it just wouldn't work. But it's very peaceful there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's part of the recording process that I don't often consciously remember, but it is absolutely part of what we experienced during this album. We traded plants, I brought seedlings at some point to them to plant, and they gave me seeds to start at some point. And so I think when you get to share that with the person and people that you're trying to be creative with, it kind of acts as a decompression tool too, because the studio can be incredibly intense. Everything you're hearing, we always say the studio doesn't lie. You go in and you record something and you play it back, and that is you. There's nowhere to hide, really. It's very revealing in that way. And sometimes that can be very painful because sometimes you don't like what you hear and you have to think about how you want to change it. So having that really intense work experience and then being able to sort of decompress with like, oh, what tomatoes are you growing this year? And, having that be part of the process was such a bonus,
Yeah, and I guess we've tapped into nature and the natural world for kind of rhythm and, various elements of musical composition for years, since time immemorial. But are there any other gardening influenced artists that you can think of that you want to highlight or that people might find interesting?
One of the things that we actually, I don't know if this is gardening necessarily, but we both bonded over kind of a mutual love of Andy Goldsworthy kind of early on in our partnership.
Oh, the artist. Yeah.
And any kind of like natural art like that, there's a lot of people doing it now. It's not just, and Andy Goldsworthy probably wasn't the first one to do it, I guess, but we did sort of bond over his art early on. I think there was a documentary out about him at that time. And so we went to see it, and then it was something we both really loved. And that connection between taking the natural world and kind of the idea of playing with whatever is around is such a joyful idea. And I know Andy Goldsworthy was saying like it's really difficult work, but I think keeping the joy in creation is really important. And I think the outdoors and the natural world can really help with that, because there's so much discovery in nature. There's so much joy in nature, especially if you surround yourself with it or you allow yourself to kind of get immersed in it. We want that in our music. We want discoveries. We want people to listen and go, oh, I didn't expect that. Or there's a sort of reveal in the music that they didn't see coming. And that is something I really love about the natural world. And I hope that that's kind of imbued in our music, because that is something that we really try to put into our creative process.
So I thought it would be really nice, actually, if you could pick a track and maybe introduce it.
Sure. Silence of the Sun on this record is a song that Sam wrote with initially a Dylan Thomas poem in mind. It's the one I had talked about before, with the idea of the force driving the green plants coming up through the earth, and sort of took it and ran with it in a way that, he changed the ideas a little bit, but it's still the kind of essence of that rebirth.
Also, I liked, just to jump in,
Yeah.
I liked the idea of the sun being as powerful and huge as it is. It's, to our ears, it's silent. And I love that juxtaposition of the silence of the sun, that it's everywhere. It is the reason we're here. It's the reason we continue. And yet, to our ears, it is completely silent. And so that image really kind of struck me too.
Yeah.
But sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
I love that. And the idea of, there's a lot of exploration on the album of a lot of juxtaposing ideas, enormous and small, dark and light, death and life. There's a lot of that on this album. And one of the things that I love about this song is it really explores our own kind of place in that world, where we can feel incredibly small in the vastness of the universe, but then there's also power and a whole universe inside each one of us. And that's an idea that gets kind of explored throughout the album, but I like how Sam wrote about it on this song in particular.
And in fact, the video that we handmade for this one, when it came out as a single, we decided to make ourselves a little crazy and try our hands at some stop motion. And the images on that were from some drawings of Megan's that were butterflies. We include, obviously, the sun, and just certainly our garden imagery kind of reared its head in that music video, for sure. So it's very much connected to our gardening time.
Yeah, if you're interested in the type of butterfly that's in that video, it's a painting I made of a Gulf fritillary butterfly, which is one we have it's very common here because there's a lot of passion flower vines around here, and that's their host plant.
Like the force that drives the flower, moves the marrow in my bones. Like a star is born dying, like the water carves the stone. I have tread a path steady, I've been laid out on the road. I have felt love's lightness as I've trembled neath the load. The voice that fell silent is the very voice I need, yet it cloaks its wisdom as it whispers from the weeds. I will find out later it was always in my lungs, but for now I'm breathless like the silence of the sun. In the longing hours of morning, I lay lingering in a dream where I stood upon a levee holding back a raging stream. From my eyes to the horizon, there was either doom or mud, and I wondered, was I foolish or a fortress in the flood? surrounds the darkness in the early hours of day. Like the force that drives the flower, moves the marrow in my bones. Like a star is born dying, like the water carves the stone. I have tread a path steady, I've been laid out on the road. I have felt love's likeness as I've trembled neath the load. I have tread a path steady, I've been laid out on the road. I have felt love's likeness as I've trembled neath the load.
Thank you very much to Sam and Megan for speaking about their music and their gardening. Thank you as well for listening. If you like this interview, I recommend checking out episode 265 with Hannah Varga, speaking about how nature inspires her art, which was released on the 27th of November 2023. And also episode 211, Soundscapes and Landscapes with Dr. Mike Edwards, which was released on the 10th of October 2022.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.